Welcome. Good evening. We are the Florida Native Plant Society Conradina chapter. We welcome you tonight. I hope you have a great time tonight, get a lot of information collected, save it. Whenever you see something on the screen that you like, take a picture of it. That's what everybody's been doing. What else? Other than that, I would like to bring on board Jane Higgins. She's our treasurer and co-chair for this year's Florida Landscaping Tour. I forget. I forgot what the website is now. BrevardLandscapeTour.org. That's what it is. It confuses me with Florida Landscaping. Landscaping with Florida Natives Tour. And this year we have a lot of very nice properties, very nice gardens to show you. But let me bring Jane Higgins on board, and she's going to tell you all about how we're going to get started. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Okay, welcome. Thanks for coming out here. Oh, gotta turn it on. That would be helpful. Okay, so this is what we're going to be covering today, the Native Landscaping 101. And we're not hawking this book here that's for sale in the back room. But we did want to let you know it's a great resource. So both Lydia and I roughly did what's in this book, but we didn't have the book and we just did it on our own. It's a lot easier if you use the book. And thank goodness they invented this book. So also wanted to mention, please hold your questions until the end. We are going to have a panel at the end of experts here to answer the questions. So if you could please hold off on that, that'd be great. So how many people here attended the Talamy presentation last month? Just show of hands. Okay, great. So those of you who did know me, I've been in Florida now for 50 years, and I have a Florida landscape. Again, I wish I'd had this book. It would have been very helpful, but we all made lots of mistakes. And if you would use the book, you'll avoid that. Save yourself some time, money, and effort. So the index to that book is over here on the right, and that's what Lydia's going to be going over. We also wanted to say a huge thank you to Satellite Beach. How many folks here are from Satellite Beach? Okay, well, you are very lucky, let me tell you, because Satellite Beach has an absolutely awesome sustainability action plan. And if you haven't seen it, I'd highly encourage you to go to the website and look it over. Over on the right are the various categories of that sustainability plan. If you do not live in Satellite Beach, I'd still highly encourage you to go out and look at it, because wherever you do live could be using this as a great example. I'm on the Palm Bay Sustainability Board, and I've given them this particular plan because it's that good, that actionable. I highly suggest that we get this throughout the county, and every town possible would be awesome. So as part of what Satellite Beach has done for us by donating this space and their incredible support of our landscape tour this year, our agreement was to help share how y'all are helping them with their sustainability action plan objectives. So we're just going to go over this real quickly in order of greatest impact. These are the objectives that you, by sitting here in this chair, are helping them with. And I need to read the bigger print one here. So the first thing is they are pursuing as a community the National Wildlife Habitat Certification. And part of doing that is that community education events like this one take place, and also that they measure how many yards in Satellite Beach have the certification. So you can have it at the yard level. Of course, getting it at the community level is a much bigger deal. 3 yards on the tour this year, all 3 of the home yards have that certification. So that's a great plus for them. And then next, we're increasing public awareness about the harmful impacts of not using native plants on the lagoon. So we're raising awareness about lagoon-friendly yards. And lastly, by using native plants, you're helping the water quality because native plants use a lot less water, a lot less fertilizer, and that's helping the IRL. So that's how you're helping Satellite Beach, and you could be helping your town too with those sustainability objectives. Okay, so now to launch into this. How many folks have purchased their tickets for the landscape tour? Like this one lady back here shoots her hand up. Yay, enthusiasm. So we'd really encourage you to get your tickets early. It's next Saturday, so that's not a lot of time. We've got tickets for sale in the back. It's $15 for a copy, a printed copy, or you can go on Eventbrite and it's $10 on Eventbrite. You get a link to all the same information in the printed copy. But when you get your ticket, what we're encouraging people to do is do your homework and get familiar with the sites and know what your strategy is for the day to go out and look at the various yards. You probably cannot get to all yards in the day and do them all justice. I think we figured out you'd have to be doing them in definitely less than an hour, including travel time, to be able to cover all of them. So we highly recommend that you study the brochure and figure out which ones are most important to you ahead of time. The good news is they're relatively close together here at Beachside, so you're not spending a lot of time doing the traveling. But study the sites and figure out which ones are important for you to see, because you're going to see that there's some in full sun, full shade. And on our website, the BrevardLandscapeTour.org website, you can see the current yards, many more pictures than are in the brochure. Plus, you can see the past 2 to 3 years of tours, and they're sortable by things like full sun, full shade, beachside, mainland. So you can actually get a wide variety to do a lot of homework. You're not going to get any addresses online, but you can see a lot of really cool pictures and plant lists and information. Okay, so you should map out a route. Please pay attention in the brochure to parking recommendations and come prepared to have fun and see some gorgeous plants. Someone was telling me today there is a chance of rain Saturday, and we do this tour rain or shine. So don't be intimidated by a little rain. The plants will be happier, okay? Okay, so when you're thinking about your landscape, what we wanted to cover quickly here is the types of landscapes. There's 2 extremes that you'll notice. One is the wildlands on the left. The other is on the right, called the manicured. You're going to see both of those kinds of landscapes on the tour. The wildlands are more like if you go to Erna Nixon, you go to a park, you see it in its wildland state, okay? That's generally less maintenance. There will be some maintenance. You still have to pull out pepper trees and things like that. The wildlife will like that wildlands look the best, okay? On the far right is manicured look, which is going to look a little bit more like the government facilities you'll be seeing on the tour. It takes a little bit more maintenance to keep it looking manicured. And although wildlife likes it, it's not the best for the wildlife, okay? You'll still attract wildlife, and that's still a good thing. Now, how many people here are living in an HOA? Okay, good. Wow, that's a lot of people. You all should definitely be coming to our November meeting when we have an attorney speaking about homeowner rights. If you're having any HOA challenges, that's going to be one for you. Okay. So what we recommend for HOAs is kind of a mixture in the middle. So that would mean that it's a little bit more manicured in the front, maybe some nice manicured beds, still a little grass around it, keeping the HOA happy, and then party in the back. So keeping it wild in the back if you can get away with that. You can probably have a little more trees and wildlife, or even just some brush piles for some wildlife in your backyard without freaking out the HOA. So when you're on the tour, this is what we wanted you to be thinking about is what do you want in your landscape? Are you wanting to be looking at manicured, wildlands, the mixture, etc.? Because that's an important decision when you're looking at this book and trying to figure out what you want your yard to be looking like in the future. You want to have a plan, not just haphazardly start throwing plants in there. A plan will save you a lot of time and effort. Okay, so I am going to turn it over to Lydia now. It was just awesome in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lydia Barber, and I am a recent transplant to Florida. I've been here about 4 years. So how many of you are in the same category as me, being a transplant and maybe a recent transplant? Okay, we learned some lessons when we start gardening here. So I want to tell you a little bit about my gardening history. The first 40 years of my life, the most significant gardening experience was when I was 4 years old. I spent the year with my grandmother in her garden, in her yard, where she had fruit trees, a grape arbor, a garden. We talked to the birds. So that year of learning about gardening and the environment lasted me a lifetime. During the next 30 years, I lived in 3 different areas in Virginia, and then we moved to Southern Maryland. And during that time, I did a little gardening here and there, but I was mostly working. I retired, and then we moved to Southern Maryland. And I joined a garden club there. And that's the second, I think, most important thing about my gardening experience. Because what I found with the garden club is that I learned about gardening from other gardeners, from programs that they had, and then from schools that were available to me. So the National Garden Club offers environmental gardening and landscape design schools, and I've taken all 3. I've finished all 3. So by 2006, I was ready to landscape my yard. Right. Okay. So I collaborated with a local landscaper. She and I had a great relationship. It was very collaborative. We did it in 4 phases over 10 years. So we'd walk the property and we'd talk about what is it that needs to be done here. And she would do a drawing and we negotiate. And when we were satisfied with what we were going to do, she and her guys would do the hard stuff. They would dig up the sidewalk that had been pushed up by the tree roots because the house had been there for 50 years. She would take down trees that needed to come down. She would put in trees that we'd decided to put in. She would put in large shrubs. And then I'd do the rest. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of collaboration. And at the end of that time, I found Doug Tallamy's book, Bringing Nature Home, and I became interested in native plants. And so I started introducing native plants into that landscape because before then, it wasn't on my radar. We decided to move to Florida, and I joined a garden club here. I joined Melbourne Garden Club a year before we got here because I couldn't imagine not being a garden club member. And we actually moved in 2019, but before we moved, I also found Doug Tallamy's next book, which is Bringing Nature Home. And this was really helpful because it talks about how you can use your yard to become part of a native wildlife national park. And so it is a homegrown national park. And as soon as I put my first 5 native plants into my yard, I registered our yard. So we're on the map. And after about a year, I knew that I wanted to create a sustainable native Florida landscape with a mixture of manicured wildlands. So what I envisioned was beds of native plants surrounded by paths of wonderful grass, separating them. So that was my vision. Did I skip one? I don't think so. What did I do? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So we got here, and here are some of the things that were new to me. And a lot of these things, as Jane described, are going to be described in this book, step by step, of how to go about doing this. And hopefully, this book, the learning curve, because I spent many, many years figuring out how to get to where I am today. Well, I started at 4, right? So that's been, 71 years. So hopefully your learning curve will be a little shorter than that. So I'm going to tell you about some of my experiences related to 1,000 people a day moving to Florida, my landscape planning. I'm going to talk to you about invasive plants, solarizing, and then 2 of my efforts. My first effort, and then creating a wildflower meadow. Okay. So you've heard probably that 1,000 people a day are moving to Florida. Well, I looked at the data, and between 2022 and 2023, Florida's population increased by 500,000. That is 1,370 people a day. That's a day. That equates to more than 500 new households a day. A day. So many of these houses are being put into our neighborhoods, and this is what happens. You're driving down the road and you see a lot, and it's filled with native plants. And 2 days later, it's gone. It is stripped. All the wildlife that was there has been evicted. All of the support that was there for the wildlife is gone. And then what happens is they build a house and they put grass around it. So this was done, this is my yard, this was done in 1991. In 2019, when we bought the property, it still looked like this. All grass, very little else, nothing there to support the wildlife. And our experience with this has been personal because we live in Palm Bay off of Eldrin Boulevard. And there's a 2-mile stretch that we live off of. And in those 4 years, over 50 lots that's happened to. And this is on a boulevard that really, what I called, was already developed. So it is taking away all of the native plants that our wildlife needs to live on. So to turn our yard into a conservation corridor, part of the Homegrown National Park, I knew that I needed to shrink the lawn, remove invasive species, plant keystone genera and other plants. So keystone are the plants, if you heard last month's presentation, that have the home for the most caterpillars. And the more caterpillars you have, the better bird population you have. The better bird population you have, the better wildlife population you have. So it's a tree of sorts. Network with friends and neighbors. Okay, a friend of mine gave me a section of her northern native spider lilies. And I divided them up. I divided up what she gave me. I gave 3 to every neighbor, and I gave the rest of them to my garden club members. So you network, and you give plants away, and you receive plants, and that's great. And then reducing fertilizer and pesticides, I don't think I need to tell you about that because I think you've probably already heard a lot about that. So to begin with, I assessed our property, and this is one of the things that she tells you to do in the book. Now, I didn't do it exactly like she said because I didn't have the book to go by, but this is what I have. And if I can do this without changing it. Okay, where is it? Is it not working today? Oh, there it is. Okay, all right. So I have 1/3 of an acre, and this is a fence line, but it also shows you the electric lines. The electric lines go here, across the back, across the side, down the side and across the street to my neighbor. So, with electric lines and a pool and septic, you have very little opportunity to have large trees to provide shade. So, what do I have? I have the sun coming up in the east across my neighbor's roof, flooding our yard with sun all day long until it sets over behind my other neighbor's house. So I have full Florida sun. Okay, if you have bought a plant that says it's good for full sun and it's not native, it won't stand up to full Florida sun, trust me. There were also just a few plants. So there was a Robolini palm right there. If you know anything about a Robolini palm, it has poisonous thorns, and the directions say don't ever plant it next to a sidewalk or a driveway. Well, look where it is. Here's my driveway, there's my sidewalk, and we had to climb through it to get to look at the house when we went to look at it the first time. It's gone. And then we had 3 sad little roses. 2 of them are gone. And we had a tree, we still have it. This is a clerodendron tree. It's also called starburst. It's a beautiful statue. Doug Tallamy calls those statues because they're not native, they're beautiful, and maybe you want to keep them because of that. So the only advantage that I have seen for wildlife is the birds roost in it overnight, and that's fine. I also have a whole bunch of bougainvillea, another statue that doesn't produce much in the way of support for wildlife, except that birds nest in it because it protects them from the swallow-tailed kites, which is a good thing. So I haven't gotten rid of it, but what I have to do is prune it every 2 weeks because it tries to take over the yard. So it's a statue that I have to prune and prune and prune. And then I have sabal palms here, and another one here, and another one there, those 2 are under the electric lines. Well, that's not going to work. And then between those sabal palms is this poor white bird of paradise. Okay, if you know what a bird of paradise looks like that's white, it is ginormous, and it's tall, and it doesn't belong there. Poor thing. I haven't taken it out. I'm going to do something with it eventually. It's still there, and it's still struggling. I also have this bed of bougainvilleas that was terribly overgrown with invasives that I'll talk about in a little bit. So that's the plants. And the other reality we faced, there weren't any birds. No birds. I was surprised. Few mockingbirds, few blue jays every now and then, but hardly any birds because there really wasn't anything to sustain them. On the plus side, when Tim and Anna came and did an evaluation of my yard, they pointed out that I do have some native wildflowers in my grass. I had Portulaca pilosa, common fan petal, and frog fruit, and there may have been others that I've forgotten, but they were there. Okay, hold on to your hats. We're moving to 2023. So that's what it looks like now. All of the orange are beds that I have either created or I have, wrong button, or I have modified. So all of these orange areas are beds that have been created, most of them created, some of them modified. And then the pale yellow are beds that I'm working on right now. So I've done a lot in those 4 years. I haven't done anything since June, getting ready for this. So it's a mess. It's a weedy mess, but that's what I've done so far. I'm going to show you the evolution of 2 of those beds. So those are the first effort there, and then the wildlife meadow that's in the front. So I'm going to show you those. But before I do, I'm going to talk about invasive plants. Okay. The Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council produced a list of invasive plants, and they categorized them by how bad they are for the environment. So I was told that for the category 1 plants, you should dig them up and put them in the trash. Don't put them in your yard debris. And for category 2, well, be careful about them. Don't give them away. Don't share them. But it was really stunning to come here and have 167 invasive plants to worry about. Because when I lived in Maryland, I had English ivy and periwinkle. And that was it. That was it that I was dealing with. So there's a lot. And the other thing that surprised me once I started learning about invasives is that I would hear people talk about native plants being invasive. Well, they're not. There's a difference between invasive and aggressive. Invasive means that it is destroying habitat. It is changing ecosystems so that they no longer support the wildlife that's needed. So for instance, that oyster plant up there in the corner that you see, if that gets loose, it spreads, it spreads, it spreads, and it crowds out all of the other native plants. And so there's nothing, it eliminates those things that are needed by wildlife. But if you have scarlet sage, it pops up everywhere because it self-seeds, but it's not forcing anything else out, and it's still supporting the native wildlife. The other thing about this list is that it is outdated. So I started looking for help. What do you do? Where do you go to figure out what should be added to the list or how it should be changed? And I found the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants, but I figured out before very long that it wasn't a complete list, so it's not a good substitution for that list. The other thing about the list is if you have ever seen it, it's 8.5 by 14, one piece of paper, little teeny tiny print, very hard to read, and it's sorted by scientific name. So I don't know very many garden club members who know things by scientific name. After a while, I got tired of it. So I took their list and I copied it and I pasted it into an Excel file and I sorted it by common name. So this list is available back in the back room here for you, or you can find it on Conradina's website. So it's available. So please feel free to use it. Thank you. Okay. That's about that. All right. I'm going to tell you some more about invasive plants. Here are some of the 167 plants. There are some listed there that are the worst 12, and then there may be some that surprise you. How many of you have heard of heavenly bamboo, also called nandina? Did you know that the berries have arsenic in them? Did you know that if the birds eat too many of the berries, they'll get sick? Do you know if they eat a lot of the berries, they'll die? So it's really not really good for the environment. It is not good for wildlife. So some of those things are going to surprise you. Asparagus fern, bottle brush, guava, orchid tree. My neighbor has the most beautiful orchid tree and she's so happy about it. Oh. Staghorn fern, wax begonia. So you need to become familiar with what's on the list because there are going to be some surprises. One more thing I want you to know about invasives. Okay, on the left, you see blue porterweed. On the right, you're looking at, oh shoot, Lydia, you keep pushing the wrong buttons. Okay, nettle leaf porterweed. Guess what? The big box stores sell that as blue porterweed. They do. So how do you know if you've got the wrong one? Okay. Blue porterweed is a ground cover. It gets to be about a foot tall. The non-native gets to about 5 feet. It can get that big. So if you've got a porterweed that you're using as screening, you've got the invasive. And I was told recently that even though this one is on the Category 2 list, it is hybridizing with the native, which is not a good thing for the wildlife that is relying on the native for sustenance and for being a host plant. The other thing is that this one is not on that aquatic list, even though it's not only a Category 2, it probably really should be a Category 1 at this point. So it's hard to tell the difference sometimes. So you really do need to know what you're doing. Okay. Have you heard enough about invasive plants? Okay. No? All right. There's lots more to talk about. Okay. One of the things that I told you that I wanted to have these beds surrounded by paths of grass. So I needed to get rid of the grass where I wanted to put the beds. And I heard lots of different advice, some of it similar, some of it different. The common message was don't use Roundup. Don't use chemical solutions to get rid of that grass. It is not good in the long term for the environment. Kills too many things. So what I do is I look at the area that I want to make into a bed. I measure it, figure out how much square feet I've got, and then I have edging and cardboard and mulch on hand. And right now I am using landscape timbers and spikes to hold them together and to the ground as my edging. I've tried wine bottles, I've tried bamboo, I've tried hardwood, and I've used some concrete slabs as well. But that's what I'm using right now. And I use cardboard, but you have to put down enough layers of cardboard to make it work. 3 is usually a good number, and you can't leave any soil exposed. And then I like using shredded hardwood on top of that because it makes a nice compact layer and it helps keep it moist until everything is dead underneath it. So when I start, I mow or weed whack the plants to the ground, the grass to the ground. Some of them I actually dig up because they're just not very nice. Put down the cardboard as I described. Oh, and I get my cardboard from Publix. They are very happy to give me their cardboard. Call them the night before and they have it for me the next morning, which is great. And then I lay the timbers on top of the cardboard. I'm going to tell you about one of the beds that I did where I laid the timbers next to the cardboard and the grass came up right between the cardboard and the timbers and it's created weeding almost immediately. So on top of the cardboard, secure them with the spikes and then mulch at least 3 inches. And then you're supposed to wait for about 3 months. Now, you hear different time lengths for that too. Now, during that time, you plan what you're going to put there. Well, there are resources that you can use to do that planning. The Native Plant Society has a website that will tell you about native plants. You're going to go on the tour and you're going to see native plants. You're going to see lists of plants and you're going to see what they look like. And that's an important thing to do. Audubon has a website, and there are others as well. There's a resource list that's going to be available for you also in that room that will list some of these resources. And you have your native plant landscapers and suppliers. Okay. Oh, I forgot to tell you one more thing about invasives. I no longer tell people I tell people now, if you have a Category 1 or a Category 2 invasive, replace it because you don't know whether it's moved to the Category 1 list because that list is so outdated. Replace it with something that's native that will suit you for that area. Okay, all right, I'm done with that and I'm done with that. All right, so I'm ready to show you my first effort. Okay, this is the south side of my house. Well, where is it? There it is. That's the south side of my house. Just bare. So I bought 5 natives, 3 firebush, and 2 coonties, and I planted them just along there, right along there. Well, the first lesson I had was planting in sand, because I was used to just digging a hole and putting a plant in it and then watering it. Well, the sand laughed at me the first time I did that. So I pulled the plant out, I filled the hole with water and let it soak, and then I put the plant back in. And that worked a lot better. I also learned quickly that those little plants were not going to survive a weed whacker or a mower. So they needed to be protected. So in 2020, I had added that edging. This was hardwood edging, and I added the cardboard and the mulch. And but I didn't do it all the way back to the wall, and I figured out pretty soon that that was a mistake. So by 2022, I had changed the edging so that it went all the way to the back. I put cardboard in all the way to the wall, and I had expanded the bed. Oh shoot, Lydia. I had expanded the bed back to the west, and I had planted frostweed. And then I had also planted ground cover because I was still having weeds, and I thought maybe that would help. So I planted sunshine mimosa and frog fruit. And then this is what it looked like June of this year. Looking at it from the west, you can see that I have salvia, and I have the frostweed, and then you can see the firebush there. And these 2 plants are right outside our living room window, which is really nice because we've seen a hummingbird the other day. We see birds and bees. We see small birds eating the seeds from the frostweed after the blooms have gone to seed. We see all kinds of birds, butterflies, bees. It's really nice to be able to look out the window and see all of that right there. So it really has made a difference. And then if you look at it from the east, you see some of the ground cover, you see the coontie that's here, you see the firebush that's back there, and the 2 others have not done as well. And that happens. Because my yard doesn't have a lot of trees, it gets a lot of exposure to cold weather and wind, and they don't always do real well when it's cold and windy. And so I've had to prune them back several times. But they're there, and they're okay. Okay, my next effort was a wildflower meadow. Okay, this was my plan for 2021. The inspiration for this was Skip Healy, because I heard him make a presentation at a garden club meeting about how to create a wildflower meadow. And he talked about solarizing, he talked about planting grasses in with your flowering plants to support them. He talked about making sure you have things planted that bloom throughout the year. So you have to look at what you're going to plant to make sure something is blooming all the time. So then I did some research, and I found that you needed to look for utilities. So I called and I had it looked at, and sure enough, there was an underground utility there, which really surprised me. But anyway, so I knew that I could only go that far down the hill. So I decided I would have a bed that's 24 by 4. And it's a good thing that I made it that small because I had planned to be able to reach it to weed. Well, and this is the bed that I planted where I put the cardboard next to the next to the timbers, and I started to having weeding it all immediately. Well, when you're on a hill like that, it's more significant than you think. So it was interesting. So, nope, that was too many. Oh, okay. So I also started looking at the plan for what I was going to put into that area. And you can see that I've drawn something using Excel that's 24 by 4. And I listed a whole bunch of plants by common name and by scientific name. I looked at the measurements of those plants. I looked at when they would be blooming. I looked at whether they're fragrant. I looked at the color of the bloom. And I used my landscape design training that I got from the school, which talked about repeating patterns, colors, textures, talked about layering, talked about making sure that things support each other. So what I decided to do is create a mirror. So in the middle is a dividing line of sorts. So on this side, you've got Fakahatchee grass and Fakahatchee grass over there. And then you've got sage here and sage there, mully grass, mully grass. So you can see what I've done. And I put lower stuff in the bottom at the lower level, and I tried to make the taller stuff in back. And I ran this list by Tim and Anna, and they gave me some pointers and made some suggestions. So it's always, and I bought most of the plants from them for this garden. All right, so that's the planning that I did. And this is the first stage where the cardboard had been put down, the timbers had been put down around the cardboard, and then it was mulched. And I went out and I bought the plants. I ordered some things, so you'll see some flags in here that represent things that I didn't have yet. So I laid them all out to where I was going to plant them. And I didn't wait the 3 months. So my weeding started because of the cardboard not being next to the timber, and it started because I really didn't wait long enough. But anyway, so this is what it looked like in 2022. And you can see that I've got a lot of horse mint. Well, this horse mint basically took over the bed. So one of the lessons I learned is you have to double check the dimensions from whatever you've looked at, because I had thought that the horse mint was going to be a foot by a foot. Well, it gets to be a lot bigger than that, and it spreads. And if I had been on the garden tour, because I hadn't been on the garden tour yet, I would have seen people growing this and I would have known better. But also double check your measurements when you're doing your planning. Okay, so this is one of my favorite photos, just because the mully grass is in bloom. The horse mint is gone because I dug it all out. There was so much of it that it got scale, and I tried to prune it back to thin it out, and it was just too bad. So I dug it all out. So this is without the horse mint, but that's what it looks like. And you can see that blooming. I have Conradina grandiflora, which bloomed almost all year, and I just love it. And the mully grass, I've been calling it muley grass so long, it's hard for me to say mully, but I'm understanding that's the way you're supposed to say it. And there is sage in here that's in bloom. And by this time, fall of 2022, I had other beds created as well. So there were lots and lots of pollinators, birds, insects. This is dune sunflowers and goldenrod. And then these are the spider lilies that my friend gave me. So that is the wildflower meadow. And I think that, okay, I talked about that. And my favorite photo. Okay. So these are the lessons learned, and I've already talked about those, checking the dimensions. I would have planted a lot fewer horsemen if I'd have known. And because the grandiflora blooms all the time, I would have used that instead. And there were other things that just didn't do as well, and it may have been because there was too much horse mint. And then later I added sunshine mimosa to replace some of the other things that were low growing that really didn't make it either. So that would provide more of a ground cover. So the other thing is wait for the solarizing to be done before you start planting. So this is what it looked like in June this year. The beds around it have been expanded. I have expanded over here. I've expanded in here. I've got a sea grape, and I've got, these are not native. These are, I'll think of them in a minute. Anyway, not everything is native and not everything has to be native, but I'm trying to do as much native as I can. I also have discovered that my grass is not nice grass. It's not well behaved. So just like everything changes, I'm going to evolve my process. And later on, you'll get a chance to hear somebody else talk about solarizing that I think you'll find interesting. Okay, that's all for me for now, except that my advice is use the Shropshire book. Don't spend 71 years learning what to do. Start small, have fun, track what you see, celebrate your success by what wildlife you see, replace those invasives, take the tour because you'll learn a lot on the tour. And then I'm gonna leave you with this. Last week, I got to hear somebody else make a similar presentation. And during the presentation, she talked about a book that she'd read. It was called Requiem for a Lawnmower. And the authors had made an observation that she shared with us. And that was that if a person has a grassy lawn, a grassy, expansive lawn, they spend many hours mowing, edging, watering, fertilizing, repairing. And if they had bought a car that required all of that, they would call it a lemon. Okay, so we're going to turn this over to a panel, but there is also, there is another slide. Okay. Oh, there's a couple more. Okay. This is a list of resources, some of which I've talked about. This list is also available back in the other room. And so you can take a picture of it, but it's also available back there. This is about the Florida Native Plant Society. It's about the book. It's about garden clubs. It's about other organizations that can help you. Okay. Do you want to do this, Jane? Okay. Since you did the slide, I'll let you do it.
Good job, Lydia. So just wanted to do a quick intro to the Native Plant Society. How many people here are familiar with Conradina? Okay, so we have a lot of new people here that would not be. So we meet monthly. Our mission, Linda likes to call it CPR, is to conserve, preserve, and restore. We are meeting now at the Church of Nazarene starting in November. And that's across from FIT on Babcock. And also many people were interested in the November speaker, who's attorney Barbara Stage, and she'll be speaking on homeowner rights. So she's represented homeowners and HOAs and helped a lot of people locally. So we are really looking forward to that topic. She's the first presenter in the new location. We also wanted to thank the sponsors on the tour. You can see there on the back of all our shirts here. We really appreciate our sponsors. And that's going to lead us right into a panel discussion here. We've got Tim and Anna from Native Butterfly Flowers. Yay! And also here we have Lars Jones, who is one of the homeowners on the tour this year. Lars is really awesome because his yard is definitely more on the wildlands, which I prefer personally. And he's an awesome nature photographer who's taken pictures over the years of all the birds that have come to the yard, many for the first time seen in Brevard County or Florida. So if you're a birder in particular, you definitely want to talk to him. So I'm going to ask all of them to come up front because we got to do it up front in order to capture it on our live streaming, and just open the floor to any questions that the audience may have. Jamie's our lovely microphone assistant, right? Oh, for questions from the audience. Oh, okay, sorry, I got that mixed up. Is this good for them to be standing? Or? Okay, thank you. Any questions? Don't be shy. Okay.
Calling on hands, you guys.
Yeah, Jamie was doing it. She's doing the microphone.
I'm very fortunate to 6 acres in ranch, and most of it is just wild. But unfortunately, the Kogan grass, and it's impossible. And it's taken over the wild areas, so many oceans. So I'm not going to plant a wildflower garden because the Kogan's just going to, you know, I love torpedo grass. So, Janet, what do I do?
So we've that's a hard one. It's tough. Kogan grass is one of the worst in the world. We've worked on a property down in Vero. It was a 4-acre property that was loaded with Kogan grass, and we have actually solarized it for over a year. And we got rid of a good bit of it doing that because we were refusing to use chemicals. I don't really know much about spraying or the chemicals, but there are, instances where that comes in,
Could you describe your way of solarizing that?
Right. Oh, yes. Good first question too then. So we use a black weed mat, like a woven weed mat that you walk on in a typical nursery to solarize grass and weeds, just to create beds. Like basically St. Augustine dies very easily. It takes about 6 weeks. It's a very weak grass and shallow rooted, so it pretty much is easy to do. There's a few species that are persistent that are usually mixed in with the St. Augustine. If there's torpedo grass or nutsedge, those are kind of the two that are a little more persistent. So we leave it down a little bit longer, and then when we take up the weed mat, we look for anything that's still yellow, and then we'll dig that out by hand. With torpedo grass, we have in drier yards, we've knocked it back pretty good if we leave the solarizing mat down for about 6 to 7 months. Otherwise, when we leave it down for about 10 weeks or so, we'll take the weed mat up and just dig it up by hand. We can't get it all in one go, so then it's a maintenance situation after that. I'm speaking about torpedo grass specifically. Kogan is kind of different. So after our initial solarizing and removal of what torpedo grass we do see, we get these white nodules and tubers underground. Then we'll go ahead and plant and mulch it. And then once a month, we do maintenance and we see it popping up. And it's more sectioned off. So it's easier to get because we've done it once. We've killed it with the solarizing. We've done one go at it. And then we see it coming up. And when we start to dig it up with little digging tools, it's more sections, little pieces of it. So over time, it can be done. And but with Kogan grass, I don't know. Do you know?
So my first question would be, is it in the wooded area, you said? It's everywhere. It does come through a weed mat, but if you watch it and pull the small ones up, I mean, everything takes maintenance, and this is what it comes down to. So my recommendation would be go it in small sections. You can't do the whole, what did you say, 9 acres or 5 acres at once. Find a space that you are willing to basically protect. Like if you wanted to make a wildflower bed, then you would have to put in borders to keep everything else out, or as much as you could, and go, like Lydia said, in little sections. Shading things is another way. It doesn't eliminate it, but it reduces its spread. And you can also, to some extent, you can mow it really low consistently, which will reduce its spread. I saw one other nursery notice that as they mowed consistently along the edge of a Kogan grass clump. It wouldn't spread further than a couple of feet into the mowed area. But yes, these are one of the, what was it, 160 invasive species we have to deal with. But also making sure it doesn't seed is important too. So, anything else?
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah, I did this yesterday, and I just had such an appreciation after I finished for how much these guys know, and I have been relying on them for years, and since the beginning, this whole project, and so I just wanted to say thank you to them first of all. But Lydia was saying a couple of things that reminded me. My son bought a new house on like a half acre, and I'm like so proud of him. It's all grass, so I'm going to start slow, but I was going to give. He's like, "What are you going to give me for my housewarming present?" I said, "I'm going to give you my mower and my gas-powered edger and weed whacker." And he said, "That's great." So I thought, take him in and get him tuned up first. And so I go to the mower shop, and the guy's like, "Well," I said, "I was giving these to my son." He's like, "Why are you getting rid of them? What you do? Put in gravel?" I said, "No, I put in natives." He goes, "Well, that's a lot more maintenance." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not even going to talk to you. I'm just going to let it go." But the truth is that it's way less maintenance than my yard that I got so sick and tired of. It's because of all the junk that's in there. And if you planted trying to do like ornamental flower beds and stuff, you start to realize pretty soon, Lydia says grass isn't well behaved. I would put it as on that list of the category 1 invasives. All that lawn grass, it's bad stuff, right? And I just like I was going to do ornamental stuff, and I just said, "There's no way it's not going to last. I'm going to be spending more time out here doing this." So I just ripped it all up, and I don't have the patience to solarize, so I just dug the whole yard up. And every time I want to do a new section, I just dig it all up. And part of the reason I did that is because one of the problems we had was dollar weed, and then one of these fancy big professional nurseries came into my neighbor's house, and they introduced torpedo grass, and so I started digging. I put everything down, and I put a whole bunch of dirt on top of it, and all this stuff started coming up from the bottom. I'm like, there's only one way to get it out, and that's to dig it out. And so I went through by hand, and I dug the whole thing out. I said, I'm really glad I did that in the end, because now I really have any maintenance problems, right? And once in a while I get like an incursion of something, but I can get in there and tackle it pretty quick. And I think the key is that I put like a concrete block wall, like a little planter wall around the whole thing, and I did that to keep that stuff from coming in. And I realized that there are really two kinds of borders. There's the decorative borders that you put on top that you get at the big box stores, and they might stop St. Augustine grass, but the dollar weed and the torpedo grass, I've dug torpedo grass down as far as 18 inches. So what I use is the roof sheeting that rolls of the aluminum or the other metal, the flashing, right? And I put that down beneath my fence and beneath my walls, like a 17-inch high section of it. And I put it down there, and that seems to stop like 99%. And if I get an incursion, it's usually my fault that there was a gap that I didn't wrap or something like that. So, that's kind of my advice is I don't have the patience to solarize, so I just dig it. Now I'm done digging, thank goodness. And the second thing is, do borders. If you're going to solarize a section, make sure you cut it off all the way around, because otherwise it'll escape. And my neighbor's now going back and tried solarizing his torpedo grass, and he can't get rid of it. And so now he's trying to dig it. I think now he's trying to spray it too. And I told him, like, spraying's not going to help. It'll kill the top, but all the tubers underneath, they just keep coming back up. So, it's unfortunately, my solution was manual labor, and it worked great for me, but you guys have to you can do that all the time, make money doing that.
Long process. Good one. Yeah, it is. So there is one species of hydrocotyle that's native. It is an edible plant also, but it does get out of control. So it can swallow up a lot of other native wildflowers, and we have a few different native species that we like to keep in control and kind of in their space, like Biden's alba, the Spanish needles is a native, great pollinator plant, but we're poison ivy. But we want diversity, and so we want to have a yard that brings in lots of wildlife and pollinators. And when you have aggressive natives, they can reduce the biodiversity in your yard, and so it's kind of a good thing to work on some of these species and keep them in there in the right spot. Yeah, you get it.
There's one more thing I wanted to mention about dollarweed. Like I've always said this too, is like, this is native, why are we dealing with it? But one of the main reasons is it's for the image too. Like if you have a native yard, there's just this phobia associated with dollarweed. People don't like it. So it makes, we try to help people keep their yards looking presentable, I guess you could say. And so if you have a wildflower section that you don't mind it, lots of diversity, that's fine. But like if you're in the front yard and you're trying to keep it a little bit neater for, the neighbors and blah, blah, blah. That's when keeping the dollarweed at bay is helpful, just because it has this weed association with it, I guess you could say. It does, but we have found that not to be as true, as we have pulled it out of like sand ridges before. And it's like, what happened to the like reducing with the water to eliminate normally, like often when you have an overwatered yard, you have a lot of native weed, dollarweed. But we have also found it in extremely dry yards, so it kind of grows all over the place. All right, anything else?
I'm not very good at names, but the plant that you said that you planted that took over the spotted Mondaria?
Horseman, Monarda.
Monarda? Yeah. Same thing happened to me. I think it just got huge. When you dug it up, did you replant it, or can you replant it?
You don't need to replant it because it has come back. It seeds itself. So I've got it and I'm pulling it up judiciously, but I'm letting it grow because the pollinators love it. Yeah.
And then one more question. I bought thistle from Native Butterflies, and it's gorgeous. I absolutely love it.
Good.
It got huge. But I had to cut it back. Is it a perennial?
No. Yeah.
So it'll just surprise me if it comes up again someplace.
Yeah, they'll reseed,
Okay.
typically, if you have the right conditions. And that was something I wanted to mention about horse mint. When we sell it in a pot, and probably how you bought it, we have like 25 plants in one pot. And so then it's like, but when it reseeds, it's normally more spread out. So it's not quite as massive. So it's not quite as overwhelming. You can thin it, or you can like choose where you want it, when you see it coming back. It was just a thought because, we do put a lot in one pot.
Pretty aggressively. Will it come back from that same spot?
Are there any leaves at the bottom? Yeah, probably. They live about 2 years normally. If there's leaves after you cut it back, it'll come back, but if there's none, it'll be done.
My question pertains to something called Virginia creeper. And I am mystified at how this plant, no matter what I do, no matter how many miles of it I pull up, pull off, axe out. I mean, I do everything but poison it with chemicals. And it just laughs and waves and, I mean, it's ridiculous. Is there any reasonable way to really seriously try to eliminate it from the landscape once it's got a foothold?
So you could use the natural control method for this. One of the reasons why it is out of hand, as well as the grapevines, but it's not a reasonable method. Which the reason Virginia creeper and grapevine are out of balance in our landscapes is because lack of fire. They are native plants. They are very beneficial. They have lots of wildlife values, but the elimination of fire out of our landscapes is why these plants are overly abundant. So you could light your yard on fire, or you could keep pulling it out. Right? Just pruning it. I mean, just pruning it is really what you have to do. I do tell people it's the same with Bidens. It's like you don't want to get rid of it because they're very beneficial. You just want to keep it in one small spot, which is a lot of work sometimes.
No, not.
So I come from Northern Virginia area, same place that Lydia lived at one point in time. And she kind of alluded to this in her presentation. That you can't always just drop plants into the ground and expect it to grow, especially if there isn't any organic matter and it's just sand. So the question is, of a lot of the Florida native plants that have been talked about today, are they amenable to growing in a native environment, i.e. sand, or do you have to fortify or amend the soil?
No, most of them will grow in normal sand. So the trick to that is, or the key is basically knowing what you're planting and knowing what environment it would naturally be growing in. So you wouldn't want to plant a swamp plant that would naturally be growing in a seasonal wetland in a sandy, dry yard. All of our plants, we always tell people they do not need fertilizer in the landscape. The key to their success and survival is getting them established properly through frequent watering. So if you have a sandy, dry yard, then you need to be planting plants that naturally live in sandy, dry areas. So that's doing your research again. Most plants, you don't need to amend the soil at all because amending soil is a short-lived thing. It disappears in about, 6 weeks? It doesn't take long. And it doesn't allow the plants to spread their roots to where they need to be. They need to spread out and look for the nutrients and water that they need. So amending the soil around the base of the plant just keeps their roots there. So it's limiting them, so it's absolutely not necessary to amend the soil for native plants. You just have to make sure you're putting the right one in where you're in your place. You got to get the right plant into that soil for what your soil is. A lot of our soil, especially in these new developments, is this horrific, like completely unnatural marl shell clay mixture that comes out of the bottom of the lakes. And so it's a challenge, but you basically have to use pioneer species to start getting your property back into a living landscape, or like nutrients in the ground, organic matter in the ground. So yeah, it's a process, but just knowing what you have is important.
I when I started looking at mine, I started digging and I'm like, you can't grow anything. It's just all sand. I grew up in Washington State, and as a kid, I loved digging holes. I would always try and dig a hole to China, like not the brightest cookie on the block, but but it was like 6 feet of just dirt, and I come down here and it's just like sand. You tear the grass out, there's a little bit of dirt, and it's just all sand. So I brought in like 25 yards, and I should have brought in 50 of garden soil and compost, and I mixed all that in when I was digging it up. And I'm really glad I did, because then everything just exploded. And then like 2 years later, I wanted to go and augment the landscape, and I started digging holes to put new plants in. It was all sand again. And I realized that they had eaten all the organic matter, it had all been transformed into all the plants, and it was all sand again. But as I dug, I noticed that there was about 1.5 inch layer from what was left of the mulch. So that's where like the whole soil food web seemed to be. And you could see the little kind of web there. And as soon as you cut through that, it was all sand again. And, so it will just like consume all that native material. But it's, I think the real key is to keep that soil food web healthy, right? It's just to keep putting that stuff on hopefully the leaf litter. Like I add some mulch sometimes and occasionally a little bit of compost, but I really don't do that much to it. It's now getting old enough for the leaf litter and everything else and the cuttings, and when my neighbor's oak trees break in the hurricanes, I throw all that stuff under there and I just keep adding to it. And hopefully, that's going to be enough, because I don't see anything that's going wrong. It doesn't look like it looks like it's healthy, but it's just like a very thin layer instead of where I grew up, where it's like 6 feet of that. Right now, it's like about 1.5 inches of that on the top.
So, are there more questions, or should we continue? So I would add to that. So basically, this is the bottom of the ocean. There's no nutrients in the sand here. It's just an old ocean bed, and that's why is the way it is, especially here where we're standing. This is a sandbar. We're trying to, bring plants that people are familiar with up north down here to plant in this bottom of the ocean sand. And so that's one of the main reasons to use natives, is because they've adapted to this sand for over thousands of years now. And in Florida, there's 3,000 species of flowering plants from the Panhandle down to the Keys. So you should be able to find, some species that would work in your spot. Because Florida has swamps, and then we have scrub and everything in between. And so the sand issue, when you plant, we suggest to water every day for a month, and then twice a week for about 2 to 3 years for anything that's woody. After that, they pretty much take care of themselves, except during the driest part of the year, usually spring, the dry season. It's good to add a little extra water just to keep them looking good. We don't really believe in drought-tolerant plants. The term drought-tolerant doesn't really work here because we get lots of rain in the summer. And if you never water your plants, we get all the rain in the summer and not a lot in the winter. And they might still be alive, but it's good to water once a week, once every couple of weeks after they're established, just to keep them producing nectar, producing pollen, producing berries. It takes a lot of water to keep producing all this food for the wildlife. So that's what I would add.
Okay, well, sure these guys will be
You just keep adding on to things. So there's a fun little saying about soil. I guess it's for the soil and lots of things, but it's leave the leaves, basically. Just leave the leaves. We have people come down from up north. I never want to see another leaf on my property again. Like, well, I know we don't have anything like we do up north as far as like deciduous trees down here. But those leaves on the ground are basically feeding the soil. There's all sorts of things that overwinter or pupate in these leaves. So this new habit, I don't know if it's new, of blowing all the leaves away and down to bare sand is just a horrific landscaping method that is extremely unenvironmental. So you can put them in beds, you can put them under your trees, or just let them fall. That is a very important nutrient cycling. Trees grow their leaves, they pull nutrients out of the ground, they put the nutrients in their leaves, they drop their leaves, and they're feeding themselves, basically. So it's nutrient cycling, and if we start getting in the way, then we are stripping all the nutrients out of the soil. All right, I think I have enough, said enough.
Well, I'm sure they'll hang around if you have any questions. We just want to wrap it up real quick and remind you about the handouts that Lydia's presentation through. The book and tickets are out there as well. Thank you so much for coming and for your interest in native plants. We hope you are really excited to get out there and plant some native plants.
And when you look at the list of invasives, there are 2 lists. So be sure you get category 1 and category 2. It's on the website also.